Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Andrew Davenport, Mayor of Whitehorse, and I welcome you all to tonight's Ordinary Council meeting. I remind councillors that the meeting, other than the confidential meeting, is being recorded, and the audio recording made publicly available on our council website tomorrow. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate and decision making and encourage openness and transparency. However, council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. Councillors and officers, please ensure that you use your microphones when you are speaking and that they are on. I formally open this meeting and ask for you all to stand for the opening prayer and statement. We give thanks, O God, for the men and women of the past whose generous devotion to the common good has been the making of our city. Grant that our own generation may build worthily on the foundations they have laid. Direct our minds to all we plan and determine is for the well-being of our city. Amen. In the spirit of reconciliation, Whitehorse City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on. We pay our respects to their elders past and present. Please be seated. I would now like to introduce our councillors and senior officers. Councillors on my left, Councillor Raylene Carr.
Good evening, everyone.
Councillor Bill Bennett.
Good evening and welcome.
Councillor Blair Barker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Councillor Tina Liu.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome.
Councillor Sharon Ellis.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all.
And councillors on my right, Councillor Ben Stennett.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome.
Councillor Prue Cutts.
Good evening, everyone, and good to see you here.
Councillor Denise Massoud.
Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to have you with us.
And Councillor Andrew Munro.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
And staff on my left, Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Nolene Duff.
Good evening.
General Manager Infrastructure, Mr. Philip Warner.
Good evening.
General Manager Corporate Services, Mr. Peter Smith.
Good evening.
Staff on my right, Executive Manager Governance and Customer Service, Mr. Tony DeFazio.
Good evening, all.
Team Leader Governance, Miss Jenny Russell.
Good evening.
General Manager City Development, Mr. Jeff Green.
Good evening.
General Manager Human Services, Ms. Terry Wilkinson.
Good evening.
And in the gallery, Manager Communications, Ms. Sally Freud. Now move to the next item of the agenda. Apologies, there are none. So I'll move on to item number 3, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Councillors and officers, are there any disclosures of conflicts of interest with regards to the matters to be considered on tonight's agenda? If so, I will require a disclosure of that interest and the nature of that interest. There are none. The next item on the agenda is a confirmation of minutes of previous meeting. Councillors, we have listed on the agenda the minutes from our last meetings requiring confirmation by council. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of 1. Ordinary council meeting held on 16th of October 2017 and 2. Special council statutory meeting for the election of mayor held on 30 of October 2017.
So moved.
So seconded.
Moved by Councillor Bennett, seconded by Councillor Munro. I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda is responses to questions. Council provides the opportunity for anyone present in the gallery to submit a question in writing on the forms in accordance with Clause 18 of our Meeting Procedure Local Law, for which we will endeavour to provide a response. I will ask the Chief Executive Officer whether there are any questions submitted.
Thank you, Mayor. There's one question this evening from Jeff White of Mont Albert, and Mr White is in the gallery. Two questions. Is Council concerned that proposed reforms to the VPP will weaken neighbourhood character requirements? And the second question, Mayor, is Council concerned that proposed reforms to the VPP will lead to less compliance with Res Code under code assessment applications? Through you, Mayor, Mr White's referring to item 9.1.3 in the Council agenda this evening, which is the officer's detailed appraisal of the proposals that are currently out for public discussion. Those proposals, Mayor, were released on the 16th of October with a very short period of time for community and council comment. Submissions are due by the 24th of November, and I'm confident that Mr White will be likely to make a submission, and I would encourage him to do so. With respect to his two questions, I think it's fair to say that officers have raised a number of concerns about the VPP discussion paper, and they're clearly outlined. With respect to the potential to weaken municipal frameworks, I think officers' concerns are clearly stated that there is the potential for that, and our understanding of the direction of DELP is in the future to minimise planning scheme amendments as well, to streamline the planning system. So the capability for the expression of individual municipalities to outline the areas of protection within the planning provisions that they would want to seek, I think is a concern that officers have reinforced in the report. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is notices of motion. Being that there are no notices of motion, the next item is petitions. Councillors, are there any petitions for tabling tonight at this meeting? No. I'll move to item number 8, urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business to be discussed tonight? There being none, I'll move to item number 9, council reports. Councillors, we have a number of reports to consider tonight listed under City Development, Human Services and Corporate. I will introduce each report in the order listed, and then we'll call for a motion with regards to the item. 9.1 City Development, 9.1.1, 13 to 15 Thames Street, Box Hill.
I have an alternate, Mayor.
An alternate from Councillor Barker. Before I call for a seconder, I would like the... I notice that the projector is being turned on to display an alternate, and I'll ask Councillor Barker to give a brief explanation of the alternate for members of the audio recording to understand. Councillor Barker.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Mayor, this is an application for a development involving the construction of 5 buildings on Thames Street. Thames Street, for councillors and residents would understand, is one of the major... Yeah,
Councillor Barker, may I ask that you just give an explanation of the changes to the... in your alternate, and then if you have a seconder, you will then be given an opportunity to move the motion and give a speech. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Mayor. Mayor, this is about the reinstatement of 1 visitor parking space required under the Act for these buildings. The officer report suggested that that be granted a waiver. This removes that waiver of the visitor parking space.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Is there a seconder for the alternate?
Happy to second, Mr
Councillor,
Mayor.
thank you. Councillor Tina Liu seconding the alternate. Councillor Barker, your moving speech, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Mayor, Thames Street in Box Hill North is a very sensitive street for a number of reasons. It's the primary feeder road, or connector road if you like, that leads to Box Hill Hospital. Mayor and councillors would have looked at all of the diagrams and the drawings of the development. It's a particularly large buildings. They're effectively 4 and 5 bedroom homes. There are 5 of them. It's a plot of about 1,500 square metres. The original officer recommendation suggests the waiver of the visitor car park space, and that's my primary concern with this objection. Thames Street, what's not shown in your drawings, and it is on some of the technical drawings by the architects, is that Thames Street has had a number of traffic control measures placed in it by council in recent years. These traffic control measures are chicanes. Now, the chicanes were put in there by council very clearly for a reason. That's because traffic volumes and speed in the area have been very considerable, Mayor. And of course, Mayor, it's against Vic Road's policy and engineering practice to place speed humps on a road that leads to a hospital for obvious reasons if you've got ambulances with the sick and injured in them. Unfortunately, the effect of these traffic control measures is that there are very large sections of the side of Thames Street that the development is on are effectively no standing signs. They're no standing. So there's very little parking on Thames Street itself. And in the applicant's traffic engineering report, they make mention that the primary place for any visitor to park would be in Mersey Street. And they also claim that you can park in Thames Street. Now, I know Thames Street intimately, Mayor. And Thames Street, again, what's not shown on the map is the actual relief of the road, which leads down from Dorking Road towards the Mersey, where it intersects with Mersey Street, and then up again as it's heading westerly towards the hospital. And there's a drop of about sort of 8 to 10 metres, Mayor. That means that the sight lines to the west, looking from the east where this side is, are very, very poor. And having walked past that street pretty much every day and driven past it, people tend to park on parallel on the crossovers. And the reason that they park on the crossover is because it's a very, very dangerous place, because you can't actually see, when cars come over the hill, you can't actually see that. All the existing residents know that on Thames Street. Now, obviously, the traffic engineers didn't pick that up, which I find concerning. So, furthering on from that, Mayor, we have a responsibility to make sure that the parking with developments is safe. Now, the applicant's traffic engineer has said that, oh, well, visitors can park in Mersey Street. Now, Mr. Mayor, again on that street, which I know intimately, there are a lot of the sort of early 20th century homes that don't have driveways and car parks. This is an area that gets all of the overflow parking from the hospital, Mayor. So all of our nurses and our doctors are parking all the way back here. So it's about 900 metres away from the hospital, but all the day-long spots are taken. And then the 2-hour spots, the residents, because they don't actually have a garage, and it's the old area where there's a right-of-way at the back, you know, that's been developed, and, you know, people haven't used that right-of-way since the Nightman stopped working. So the point is that we need to reinstate the visitor car parking space to make sure this is safe, because we don't want people, you know, walking across Thames Street carrying a pavlova and an esky to visit this people in this development being hit by a car. And the reason why, and again, officers were very helpful in terms of drafting this improvement to the application, was that it enables the continuation of some of the open space and allows the planting, because if we did it another way, potentially those setbacks could be decreased, and that's not what we want, Mayor. Again, it's a beautiful street with some incredible street trees that provide very important shade. So, Mayor and councillors, I'd please urge you to support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I agree with this amendment that Councillor Barker has put forward. Look, this area, as well as nearby Dorking Road, is often very challenging when it comes to finding on-street parking. And Councillor Barker just touched upon the chicanes and the treatment plans there, which have been successful in reducing the speeds there. However, at the same time, it has also meant that we've lost some of the on-street parking that were originally on the street. I think given the size of this development as well and the location of the site, which is essentially a gateway to Box Hill Hospital as well as the schools nearby, and there's also currently an aged care development that's being built on Dorking Road. I think the reinstatement of the car park will certainly provide better parking provisions for the development as well as the people visiting it moving forward. So I encourage my fellow councillors to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Is there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? Being no other speakers, I will put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Move to the next item of the agenda, 9.1.2, 10 to 12 Costello Street, Mont Albert North.
Mayor, I have an alternate.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Liu, may I ask that you give a brief explanation of what your alternate entails?
Certainly. Councillors, this proposal looks at constructing 6 dwellings on 10 to 12 Costello Street, Mont Albert North. I am proposing that this application be refused based on the grounds that have been listed on there for your reference. And yes, I hope to speak to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Is there a seconder for the motion?
She certainly does, Mayor.
Councillor Barker. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, this proposal, as I mentioned before, looks at the construction of the 6 double-storey dwellings at 10 to 12 Costello Street, Mont Albert North. So throughout this process, 15 objections were received with various issues raised by residents regarding this development proposal. I chaired this planning forum in June of this year, and after much consideration and review, I'm refusing this application as I feel that it's an overdevelopment in this area. Councillors, the proposed site is located in General Residential Zone Schedule 4. The surrounding properties here mainly consist of single-storey dwellings, and this is the general nature of Costello Street and the neighbouring streets. I think given the zoning, as well as the state planning framework, it is expected that there would be some natural change to the area to encourage diversity in dwelling stock, as well as the level of density, as it's near public transport routes, as well as the Box Hill Metropolitan Activity Centre. I think that the residents understand and accept that there will be some change as part of the state planning scheme and population growth, and that developments in the area are to be expected as well. However, I think this proposal falls short of what is keeping with the neighbourhood character of this area. The number of dwellings proposed on the site and the bulk and footprint of each unit, which lines up one after another, packed in right next to each other, on a site size of 1,518 square metres is certainly of concern. So if you calculate this, on average, this is less than 300 square metres per dwelling. Setbacks and overlooking has also been raised as an issue. In particular, given the site, it has a natural elevation and slope. While I acknowledge that the developer, that they've made slight amendments and modifications to address this, it only covers some of the issues. Another area of concern that has been raised also is the increased traffic going in and out of the property and potential demand pressures on the on-street parking that often comes with a development of this scope and size. Also mentioned in the refusal motion is the proposed crossovers as well, which will essentially minimise some of the on-street parking as well. I think these are certainly very valid considerations, and what's also mentioned there in the refusal motion is just around protecting the greenery, and this proposal looks at removing quite a few significant trees and also has limited capacity in terms of planting vegetation on the site. As you are well aware, councillors, this pocket of our town is part of the Garden Suburban Precinct, and certainly trees and greenery add to the leafy style and character of the area, and it's also a very important wildlife corridor as well. As a responsible authority, we certainly need to ensure that we provide reasonable standards of amenity for existing as well as new residents. I think a more modest design footprint would have been more appropriate for this area, but the current application is an overdevelopment on the site, so I would certainly encourage my fellow councillors to refuse this proposal in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Barker.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Liu's covered this well. Now, this development, as you'll note from the officer's report, has significant conditions put on it. And, you know, that's to be celebrated, and our officers have done some outstanding work. And I would also congratulate the applicant that did make some minor changes so that this application would be considered in far greater depth by councillors and officers, and that was the case. Also note, again, with this proposal has something going for it in that two of the units, a two-bedroom, which does satisfy that desire to have more varied housing stock in our area. But councillors, the other most important part of this for me is the garden suburban, context. For those of you that are not familiar with the site, like Councillor Liu and I, you'll note there are cues on your plans that show the number of tree protection zones on neighbouring properties. There are really, really big and established trees. And yes, you can have a tree protection zone to protect those trees, and some of the conditions go to that. And this site is also basically opposite one of those parks that makes up the Gawler chain. And on that sort of triangular park, which is a lovely open space and would be a great place for people to recreate if they were to live in this site. But again, there are a lot of very, very established trees. So this is an open park, sort of very, very green area, and all the surrounding houses have very large and established trees. And again, as Councillor Liu said, typically single level buildings. And so, whilst the applicants, has some aspects to their application that are admirable, it certainly doesn't satisfy in any sense the garden suburban neighbourhood character test as far as I'm concerned, Mayor. And of course the opportunity for this site, and we understand that trees are, dare I say it, renewable and that they reach end of life. But this is a very treed area, and there aren't those planting opportunities on this site because it's been, well, potentially going to be built up so heavily. It just would not fit the street. So I'd urge everyone to back this refusal motion. Councillors, let's look after this street. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Are there any speakers against this motion?
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. I actually wasn't going to. I was probably going to vote against the refusal, but I probably wasn't going to speak. But I have listened intently to the debate tonight in the reasons the councillors have put forward. Councillors, the difficulty we have in terms of planning is we do need, and Councillor Barker I think alluded to the diversity of stock in terms of what is being put forward in this application, with some two-bedroom, some smaller units as part of the mix of the six. And certainly diversity of stock is very important across our municipality for people downsizing, for people getting started. It's very difficult for people to get started in the city of Whitehorse given the value of land, and certainly a multi-unit development does give some people an ability to purchase and get a foothold in Whitehorse where they might otherwise not be able to do so. Councillors, I do note, and I was looking for the overall square meterage, but I take it on face value that it is a little bit under 300 square metres, as Councillor Liu had said. And certainly, certainly I would always like to see, you know, at least 300 square metres where possible. But it depends on the response that is being made and how the property is laid out and the dwellings are being sited. Councillors, I do note on page 21 of the report that the building coverage on this block is 48.2%. And it has a permeability on the block of 38%, which is quite a large figure. So that provides a fair degree of opportunity for planting and for vegetation to be part of that block. So it is hard to argue that it's a complete overdevelopment. It is 2 blocks as it stands today, 2 residential street blocks. And so while we are talking about 6 dwellings, it is over 2 distinct blocks as they exist today. Councillors, in terms of the traffic and the increased traffic load, I'm not convinced that having, and I assume there are 2 dwellings on the 2 properties to date. If not, they're certainly entitled to have some dwellings on there. I'm not convinced that the addition of the going to 6 properties is an unreasonable impost in terms of traffic on that street. It certainly is an increase, and it might be a large increase in percentage given how many other houses there might be in the street. But in the scheme of things, it is not something that I think the street network would struggle in coping with. Councillor, so it's always easy to refuse, but how strong are our justification and our grounds to do so? Certainly, the ward councillors are closer to this site than I am. I haven't been there. I'll admit that, but I do see a lot of planning applications, and I think there is some merit in this application. And to just refuse without giving a proper consideration, I think is a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Are there any speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett.
So, thank you, Mayor. Look, I think Councillor Munro said, you know, he finds it difficult to say that it's an overdevelopment. I don't think it's difficult to say this is an overdevelopment at all. I would have supported an alternative to reduce the number of dwellings on the block, but I'm also, given that the absence of that alternative, happy to support the alternative here to refuse what's being clearly an overdevelopment. Councillor Munro talks about people getting into the property market and how difficult it is in Whitehorse. Well, just have a look at Box Hill. The state government for the last 10 years or 15 years have been telling us that Box Hill is to become a central activity area, a central activities district, you name it, they keep on changing the names. Now it's a metropolitan activity centre where you're going to have high levels of residential and commercial development. People can live there affordably, and that should put, we agreed with that. We went along with that argument on the basis that the substantial development would be in Box Hill. And the towers that are in Box Hill, we put up with that because the argument would be that that would protect the neighbouring suburbs. Suburbs like Mont Albert, suburbs like Box Hill North, suburbs like Nunawading and Vermont, all around Whitehorse, that would have less development because the majority of the intensive development would be in the central part of Box Hill. We don't need developments like this that try and cram 6 dwellings on this block. You might argue 5 or 4 might be acceptable, but not 6. 6 is not acceptable on this block, and it's unnecessary, and it's just greed. That's all it is.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Are there any speakers against the motion? No. Any other speakers, either for or against? I will ask Councillor Liu for the right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, as Councillor Stennett has said, Box Hill has been designated as higher density, especially in the centre, in the activity centre. And that is also to preserve the development not spilling out to the neighbourhood, basically. And what we're seeing with this particular application is that it is the aggressive development in our neighbourhood and our general residential areas. And I think we need to stand up for our residents. We need to preserve the neighbourhood character and ensure that such applications are thought out thoroughly, and that we're not just cramming in as many dwellings as we can on a site. So I hope the councillors understand where I'm coming from and where the concerns of our residents are coming from as well. Thank you.
Councillors, I will put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried. A division has been called. Those in favour? Councillor Carr, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Barker, Councillor Liu, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Cutts, Councillor Masood. Against? Councillor Munro, Councillor Davenport. I declare the motion carried. The next item on the agenda is 9.1.3, Reforming the Victorian Planning Provisions Discussion Paper. Submission to DELP. May I have a mover?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Barker, seconder.
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Bennett. Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mayor. This is I think the CEO stole my thunder and one of our members of the gallery tonight. This is about the DELP intention to do a discussion paper about reforming Victoria's planning processes, and it's designed to make them more streamlined, more accessible, easier to work with. It has a number of very meritorious and admirable objectives. This is only a discussion paper in our offices, and I congratulate them for the thoroughness of their report. This will be our response back to DELP or VPP about their discussion paper. Now, whilst those objectives to improve it, and it's about making a lot more of it online, a lot more transparent, there are some necessary potential trade-offs in that in terms of simplification. We've already had a discussion from the CEO to one of our questioners about the potential loss of control of some of the planning controls that we have at the moment. So this is a response to a discussion paper. It's very early in the piece. The officer report is there. I can't summarise all of it in detail because some of the detail is important, Mayor. I certainly recommend it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Bennett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I'd support those comments and also support the comments of the CEO in answer to the question from the gallery. A lot more articulate than what I'll be. But I'll move forward because this report is important because it highlights the concerns that officers have in relation to reforming the Victorian planning provisions. I'm always concerned, as has been pointed out, when there's only a short time given between the release of the report and the deadline for submissions, just over a month. And it seems to me that that's quite inadequate for quite broad-ranging potential changes to the Victorian planning provisions. I'm also concerned that the proposed gazettal of the first phase of this reform is likely to be made by a ministerial amendment. And that means, councillors, that council, us, and the community will not be able to participate, and I think that's a travesty. Also, the uncertainty of what resources might be needed to redraft the Whitehorse planning scheme is a worry to me, and it could mean quite a significant financial burden if that goes ahead. And officers quite rightly point out that a one-size-fits-all reform proposal restricts some specific local policies, and that was what was brought out by the question tonight, and that's certainly not supported by officers. In my view, dumbing down of the municipal strategic statement is also, I also support that, and councillors support that, because the municipal strategic statement provides a real direction for our council plan, amongst other things, and it's important that the council plan is the thing that drives what we do as a municipality. So having said all that, as Councillor Barker had said as well, there are some positive initiatives, and the theory of making it easier and simpler to operate have improved, potentially have improved efficiencies, and easier access and understanding, I think, are good things. We just hope that our submission and the concerns of our officers are taken on board. So I seek your support for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? I will put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda is 9.1.4. Tender Evaluation Report, Contract 20051, Hague Street, Box Hill South, Road Reconstruction. May I have a mover?
Happy to move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. A seconder?
Happy to second, Mayor.
Councillor Masood. Councillor Ellis.
Just briefly, this road is in very poor condition. It's actually reaching the end of its serviceable life and it badly needs replacing. One of the problems along the way has been the pin oaks. We've got an amazing avenue of pin oaks in that street. In fact, probably one of the largest in Whitehorse, and that's necessitated an extension of the curb and channelling a few centimetres each side of the road. But that will only affect the road to the extent that it's bringing it almost in line with many of the other roads in the municipality. Additional to these works are also improved drainage and vehicle access. The successful tenderer, the recommended tenderer, is Etheridge Minton, and they've got a history of works in this area and should be able to do a wonderful job. And I'm looking forward to travelling down Hague Street and seeing the works when they're finally completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I agree with what Councillor Ellis has said. I think it's a road that definitely needs to be well maintained. The street parallel to the west has Roberts McCubbin Primary School. The street to the east has the Box Hill South Community Neighbourhood House. It's quite heavily utilised, not just by the residents of the street, but other visitors into the area. So it's really important to get it brought up to the standard it should be, and I think it's a project well worth supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? There being no other speakers, I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item of the agenda are officer reports from Human Services. 9.2.1, Collections Policy. Can I have a mover?
Happy to move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. A seconder?
Happy to second.
Councillor Cutts. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As a member of the Visual Arts Advisory Committee, I'm more than happy to move the motion that Council approves the Collections Policy 2017 to 2025 to ensure the sound museum standard governance and exhibition of the collections owned by the City of Whitehorse. The proposed collection policy combines the former art collection policy and the exhibition policy into the one collections policy, acknowledging the synergy between the collection items and how they are exhibited in the municipality. The collections policy also recognises the growth of the memorabilia collection and formalises the governance framework to manage the development of this collection. It is recommended to rename the memorabilia collection the Civic Collection to better reflect Council's artefacts which have been amassed over the years. With the art collection comprising of almost 1,700 items, 600 of those being donated, along with a considerable collection of ceramics, again most of which were generously donated by Ceramics Victoria, the collection also includes approximately 800 items in what is now to be known as the Civic Collection. Councillors, you can see this collection is very significant and it makes perfect sense for an official collections policy to manage all three of these collections under one policy. It's a bit silly to have three individual policies, so to combine them all under one, to have them managed as an overall collection makes absolute perfect sense to me, and I'm all in favour of it, and I hope you are too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Cutts.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add a few more things to this, the collection actually contains four main themes, which is the Australian landscape theme, which has come from the Roberts McCubbin era, the Box Hill camp, the urban suburban landscape theme, which has come from that, Australian Impressionism theme, and the craft theme, as was mentioned by Councillor Carr. Now, the craft theme has come from the potteries, which this area is very well known for. This area was called Tunstall, and named after the area in England called Tunstall, which was known for its tile making and potteries and things like that. And hence that's why we have got a craft theme, and very much the pottery theme being something which is very important to council. Some of the other things which are involved in this collections policy cover the acquisition and development of the works, exhibitions, donations and bequests to the art collection, and deaccessioning. So the whole realm of those are covered within this particular policy. Just some other things, just talking a little bit about the civic collection. This is an important part of what we have here at Council, and covers such things as donations and gifts from international visitors, our sister city, Matsudo, sporting theme and heritage theme. So councillors, I do ask you that you support this 8-page collections policy 2017 to 2025. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I'd like to make a couple of comments in support of this motion, because I think it's very important to recognise the history of our municipality. From the days of Box Hill, a preeminent area for an artist camp and for art in general. And this has been through many years of councils to support this collections of artworks, now called the Civic Collection. I think we could expand the, if you like, the concept of Whitehorse being a city of excellence as far as art and artistic merit is concerned. I see that this is as a real opportunity of setting a direction for the city of Whitehorse. So I think that we have some natural advantages here, and I think we can stand out amongst other municipalities, not just in the eastern suburbs, but in the municipality of Melbourne. There are a number of things that we have that are quite unique. We have a strong sister city relationship with Matsudo, which is one of the longest running sister city relationships in Australia. We have a newer friendship city relationship with a city in China, Shaoxing, and we have a number of examples of some of the artwork from China that are also in the collection. So I guess that will be included under the sister city theme. I just think we need to take more and more opportunities to publicise and promote the fact that our collection, in my view, is second to none. And I think we can make some real inroads in seeing Whitehorse as a destination for people to come and actually view and partake in the artistic parts of this municipality. So I fully support this collections policy, and I can certainly see it being expanded in the future, and I'd support that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any other speakers? I'll move to put I will put the motion. Hang on, Councillor. Okay. I'll move to put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. I move to the next item, reports from corporate reports. Item 9.3.1, Quarterly Performance Report for the quarter ended 30th of September 2017. Can I have a mover?
Yep, happy to move.
Councillor Stennett, a seconder.
Happy to second.
Councillor Munro. Councillor Stennett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, as in the report, purpose of this report is to brief Council on the performance against the Council plan and the annual budget for this first quarter, ended 30th September. And I'm happy to report that we're making excellent progress against both the annual plan and the annual budget. So first, the annual plan, just some key highlights of the identified 37 major initiatives which contribute to part of the budget, and just in terms of the goes towards the 4-year plan we've just adopted. So the annual plan, obviously the first year out for the council. Some of the major highlights noted in the report: the municipal health and wellbeing plan that we've adopted. We should all be really pleased on the amount of consultation and the style of consultation that took place there and the result. The Bennett's-Wood Reserve Pavilion and the Elgar Park North Sports Pavilion. It says construction is progressing well. Of course, we've got the Elgar Park officially opening this month, which is exciting. The energy efficient street lighting, that's exciting. That program rolled over 2 financial years is now complete, and more than 3,000 lights were changed over with LED lights over the whole program. The Box Hill Skate Park extension, another exciting project, officially opened last month, and the digital transformation strategy underway over the next couple of years, which was quite exciting as well. The annual budget, the year-to-date financial result is of 98.4 million is a surplus favourable to budget by $5.8 million, and the capital works we've spent $4.4 million on expenditure so far this financial year, which is 9.5% of the available funding for the year, and with total commitments of 12.9 million, which is 28% of total available funding. So we're well on track in terms of meeting our commitments for the financial year. It's I think the next couple of years is going to be quite ambitious, even perhaps more ambitious capital works targets than we've previously seen. We've got some major projects on the books now, the Whitehorse Centre and the Nunawading Community Hub. So I look forward to reading about those projects in the future reports.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's not a great deal to add, but if I can just say that those capital works programs that have just finished, the skate park, Elgar Park, which is about to open, certainly the Bennett's-Wood, which is well underway, are terrific facilities, and they'll certainly serve our city well for many decades to come, and congratulations to all.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes.
Councillor Masood.
I think a lot of the things have been covered, but I just wanted to add a little bit more, particularly the highlights that are listed there. I was discussing the highlights that were in the agenda papers tonight with my husband, who's passionate about lighting, and we were discussing how that first phase that we did about 4 years ago now, when we did the twin T5s, and he said, "Oh, the light's amazing," and I said, "Well, we've just finished all the LEDs." And I think we have to be really mindful of how well illuminated our streets are now that we've gone to that effort, and I think it's really valuable. And Councillor Stennett mentioned the health and wellbeing plan, which I think we're all very proud of, and all of these highlights here list things that are so important, I think, for the health and the wellbeing. But I do need to make a comment that Box Hill Skate Park extension is so heavily utilised. I drive past it nearly daily, and I see families, I see older people, some of them gamer than me, I think, being on a skateboard, and then young children and that, and it is so well utilised. It is just amazing, and I really think we commend all of the officers that were involved in the design and that, because it's an outstanding result, I think, for the community, and I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Are there any other speakers? I will put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda is 9.3.2, Delegated Decision, September 2017. Can I have a mover?
Happy to move. Yeah.
Councillor Masood. Seconder?
Happy to second.
I'll recognise Councillor Munro. Councillor Masood.
This is really just a procedural motion. There's no need really to speak to it. So I will just support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just refer councillors to the printed agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Are there any speakers on the motion? Being no speakers, I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Councillors, we now move on to item 9.3.3, councillor appointments to organisation and community bodies. In the printed agenda on pages 55 and 56 contain the nominees for certain positions as printed. In addition, I've been notified that body number 16, which is on page number 56, Councillor Masood has indicated a withdrawal and Councillor Stennett has indicated a nomination. I will firstly ask if all nominees on the printed agenda and the additional items I've outlined are accepted by the nominees. And secondly, are there any additional nominees or anyone else that wishes to withdraw from those positions currently listed? Then if everyone is agreed, I will seek a motion that all nominees listed in 55 and 56 be duly appointed.
Happy to move that motion with the amendment as you outlined.
Councillor Munro.
Happy to
Happy
second.
to second.
Sorry, Councillor Cutts. I recognise you, Councillor Cutts. Okay. Given...
Happy to move, Mr Mayor, but
Thank
nothing further to add.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Cutts.
Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. I'd like to congratulate all of the councillors appointed to those particular positions. I will now call for nominations in order of the following positions that were listed in 55 and 56 that had no names against the positions. So body number 2, Municipal Association of Victoria, main delegate. I call for nominations.
Happy to nominate, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Munro.
Happy to nominate, Mayor.
Councillor Masood.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carr.
Happy to nominate.
Councillor Ellis. Councillors, as this body has a main position as well as a substitute position, and also because a number of nominations exceed the number of vacancies required to be filled, then election will be necessary. and I will hand over to the CEO, who will assist me as returning officer and conduct the election for this position. Thank you, Ms. Duff.
Sorry, we're just doing shuffling.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We will now undertake voting in the order of nomination of candidates for the principal position for the MAV for the coming year. Councillors, just a reminder, you only vote once, not often. So I now call for those who would like to support Councillor Munro for the principal position for the MAV for the year ahead. So that is Councillor Munro, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Bennett and Councillor Barker. Those wishing to support Councillor Massoud. Councillor Massoud. Those wishing to support Councillor Carr. Councillor Carr. Those wishing to support Councillor Ellis. Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Cutts and Councillor Stennett. Therefore, we don't have a clear majority, so we eliminate the two councillors that will, pardon? The least number of votes. So we need to move to a by lot, I beg your pardon, by lot elimination of the two councillors Massoud and Carr from the voting, and then we'll move to a further vote in order to seek a majority of councillor support for the nomination. So I'll hand over to Mr. DeFazio. So, councillors, we'll now call on Councillor Carr to select from the box, being our meeting procedure in alphabetical order. Defeated. Thank you, councillors. So we'll now move to a further vote with three candidates in position, that being Councillor Munro, Councillor Massoud and Councillor Ellis. So I once again call on councillors who wish to support Councillor Munro. That being Councillor Munro, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Bennett and Councillor Barker. Those councillors wanting to support Councillor Massoud. Councillor Massoud. Those councillors wanting to support Councillor Ellis. That being Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Carr, Councillor Cutts and Councillor Stennett. Councillors, we therefore will move to a further vote, having eliminated Councillor Massoud as the lowest polling candidate, and we'll move to two remaining candidates, and we do need to achieve either a majority or, if it's a split vote, 5-5, we will again move to a selection by lot. Thank you for your assistance, councillors. So I now call on those councillors wishing to support Councillor Munro for the position. That being Councillor Munro, Councillor Massoud, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Bennett and Councillor Barker, and those councillors supporting Councillor Ellis. That being Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Carr, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Cutts. That being 5 votes all, we'll move to a selection by lot, and that will be in alphabetical order with Councillor Ellis choosing a card. Defeated. That puts Councillor Munro as Councillor's delegate for the MAV for the year ahead. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll move now to the substitute position for MAV. Can I please call for nominations for the substitute delegate?
Happy to nominate myself.
Councillor Ellis,
Happy to nominate, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Carr,
Happy to nominate. Yeah.
Councillor Massoud. Councillors, as there are more nominations than there are vacancies for the position, then an election will be necessary, and I will ask the CEO to assist me as returning officer for the conduction of the election for this position. Thank you, Ms Duff.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, the same procedure applies, so we're voting with respect to the substitute candidate for the MAV. The first nominee is Councillor Ellis. I'll call for support for Councillor Ellis. Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Cutts. Those councillors wanting to support Councillor Carr, those being Councillor Carr and Councillor Bennett, and councillors supporting Councillor Massoud, that being Councillor Munro, Councillor Massoud and Councillor Davenport. Thank you, councillors. Therefore, Councillor Carr is eliminated, having the least number of votes, and we move to a further vote between Councillor Ellis and Councillor Massoud. And I once again call on councillors seeking to support Councillor Ellis. Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Carr, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Cutts. Therefore, Councillor Ellis is elected as the substitute for the MAV for the year ahead. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Nolene. I will now call for nominations for the position of Whitehorse Business Group. Councillors, there are 2 positions that are available for the Whitehorse Business Group. I call for nominations.
I'd like to nominate Mayor.
Councillor Cutts,
I'd like to nominate Mayor.
Councillor Liu,
And yes, I'd like to nominate too. Thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yep, I will ask CEO to assist me in conducting the election as returning officer. Thank you, Ms Duff.
Thank you. So, councillors, we have 2 positions to elect and 3 nominations. So I'll deal with the first position and I'll seek those councillors wishing to support Councillor Cutts for that position for the year ahead. Thank you. Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Barker. Those councillors wishing to support Councillor Liu, Councillor Liu, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Carr and Councillor Massoud, and those councillors wishing to support Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bennett, Councillor Davenport and Councillor Munro. So, councillors, we have 3 votes each for Councillor Cutts and Councillor Bennett. So I'll ask Mr De Fazio to move to a selection by lot, with Councillor Bennett being the lucky selector. Thank you. So Councillor Bennett is defeated, and that leaves Councillor Cutts and Councillor Liu remaining. This is once again for the first position for the Whitehorse Business Group. So I move to those councillors wishing to support Councillor Cutts, Councillor Munro, Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Davenport, and those councillors wishing to support Councillor Liu, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker, Councillor Carr and Councillor Masood. So Councillor Liu is elected to the first position. So councillors, now we move to a second vote for the second position for the Whitehorse Business Group for the year ahead, with two candidates being Councillor Cutts and Councillor Bennett. So I now once again call for those councillors seeking to support Councillor Cutts. Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Carr, Councillor Barker and Councillor Ellis. That being 6 votes, Councillor Cutts is elected to the second position for the Whitehorse Business Group for the year. So the two councillors elected to the Whitehorse Business Group being Councillor Liu and Councillor Cutts. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. I'll move to the next position, being the Whitehorse Manningham Regional Library Corporation. Councillors, there are 2 positions for nomination for available. I call for nomination.
I'd like to nominate Mayor.
Councillor Cutts,
I'd like to nominate Mayor as well. Thank you.
Councillor Liu,
I'd also like to nominate.
Councillor Masood. Councillors, as there are more nominations than there are positions available, I will ask the CEO to act as returning officer and conduct the election. Thank you, Ms. Duff.
Thank you, Mayor. Once again, councillors, there are 2 councillors to be elected for the Whitehorse Manningham Regional Library Corporation. So I'll deal with the first vacancy, the first position first. Those councillors wishing to support Councillor Cutts. Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Carr. Did somebody have their hand up and put it down? I'm sorry. Could you just do that again? I'm sorry. I'm a bit slow. Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Carr. Thank you. Those councillors wishing to support Councillor Liu, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker, and those councillors wanting to support Councillor Masood, Councillor Masood, Councillor Munro, Councillor Davenport and Councillor Bennett. So we have 2 councillors on equal votes of 3, that being Councillor Cutts and Councillor Liu. And everybody's getting a turn tonight. So Councillor Cutts, it's your opportunity to select by lot. Sharing it around. Thank you. So we now move to a second round of voting with 2 candidates remaining, that being Councillor Liu and Councillor Masood for the first position on the Whitehorse Manningham Library Board. So I now seek support, those wishing to support Councillor Liu. That being Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker, Councillor Carr, Councillor Cutts and Councillor Stennett. That being 6 votes, Councillor Liu will take the first position on the library board. And we'll now move to the second position on the library board, which will be a selection between Councillor Cutts and Councillor Masood. So I now call for those councillors wishing to support Councillor Cutts. Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Carr, Councillor Barker, Councillor Liu and Councillor Ellis. That being 6 votes, Councillor Cutts is elected. So the 2 councillors elected to the Whitehorse Manningham Regional Library Board being Councillor Liu and Councillor Cutts. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Duff. I now move to page 56 of the agenda. Item number 10, Advisory Committee for the Review of the Chief Executive's Officer's Development, Mayor of the Day and past mayor are automatic members of this committee. I therefore seek nominations for 2 positions for councillors.
Happy to nominate myself.
Councillor Ellis,
Happy to
Councillor Barker,
Happy to nominate.
Councillor Cutts. Are there any other nominations? There being none, as there are more positions than there are, as there are more nominations than there are positions, we will need to conduct election, and I will call Ms Duff to act as returning officer for the election. Thank you, Ms Duff.
Thank you, Mayor. Once again, councillors, we have 2 positions to elect and 3 candidates. So I'll first move to the first position for the advisory committee role, and I seek those councillors wishing to support Councillor Ellis for the position. That being Councillor Ellis and Councillor Carr. Those councillors. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see people's hands up. Ellis, Carr, Stennett, Cutts. I'm sorry. It's just so hard to see here. Sorry, can we just do that again? My apologies, councillors. For those wishing to support Councillor Ellis, Councillor Carr, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Masood. Thank you. Those councillors wishing to support Councillor Barker, Councillor Barker, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Davenport and Councillor Munro, and those councillors wishing to support Councillor Cutts, Councillor Cutts and Councillor Liu. So therefore Councillor Cutts is eliminated, and we'll move to again further vote for the first position for the advisory committee between Councillor Ellis and Councillor Barker. And I now call those councillors wishing to support Councillor Ellis, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Carr, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Masood, and those councillors wishing to support Councillor Barker, Councillor Barker, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Cutts and Councillor Munro. Thank you, councillors. That's 5 councillors each. So we therefore move to a selection by ballot. And Councillor Barker, this is your turn. Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. Defeated. So therefore, Councillor Ellis is elected to the first position. And therefore we have a selection between Councillor Barker and Councillor Cutts for the second position on the advisory committee. So I therefore call for those councillors seeking to support Councillor Barker for the position. Councillor Barker, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Carr, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Munro and Councillor Masood. So that being 6 votes, Councillor Barker is appointed to the committee. So the 2 councillors for the advisory committee for the review of the CEO's development are Councillor Ellis and Councillor Barker. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Duff. The next item is item number 17, Domestic Animal Management Plan Advisory Committee. There are councillors, there are 2 positions available. I now call for nominations.
Happy to nominate, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carr.
I would also like to nominate, please, Mayor.
Councillor Masood.
Yes, Mayor. Nominate.
Councillor Barker. Are there any other nominations? Councillors, as there are more nominations than there are positions, I will call upon Ms Duff to hold an election and act as returning officer. Thank you, Ms Duff.
Thank you, councillors. Once again, there are 2 councillors to be elected to the Domestic Animal Management Plan Advisory Committee, and we have 3 nominations. So I'll move to the first position voting. Those councillors seeking to support Councillor Carr. Councillor Carr, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Stennett and Councillor Cutts. Those councillors wanting to support Councillor Massoud, Councillor Massoud, Councillor Munro. Those councillors wanting to support Councillor Barker, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker and Councillor Davenport. Therefore, we move to a second round of voting. Councillor Massoud is eliminated, and the 2 remaining councillors for the first position for the DAMP committee being Councillor Carr and Councillor Barker, and I'll seek those councillors wanting to support Councillor Carr. Councillor Carr, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Cutts, Councillor Massoud and Councillor Munro. Therefore, Councillor Carr is elected to the DAMP committee. We now move on to the second position on the DAMP committee, being between Councillor Massoud and Councillor Barker. And I call for those councillors wishing to support Councillor Massoud. Councillor Munro, Councillor Massoud, Councillor Stennett, and those councillors wishing to support Councillor Barker, Councillor Ellis, Councillor Liu, Councillor Barker, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Carr, Councillor Davenport and Councillor Cutts. So Councillor Barker is elected. So the 2 councillors representing 2 councillor representatives to the Domestic Animal Management Plan Advisory Committee being Councillor Carr and Councillor Barker. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Duff. Now move to item 19, Eastern Region Group. Mayor of the Day is a automatic member. There is 1 councillor position available. I call for nominations.
I would like to nominate myself for that position.
Councillor Ellis.
Yes, I'd like to nominate as well, thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
I'd also be interested in nominating.
Councillor Massoud. Councillors, as there are more nominations and positions available, I'll call upon Ms Duff to act as returning officer and conduct an election for the position. Thank you, Ms Duff.
Thank you, Mayor. There is 1 position available and 3 candidates, with Councillor Ellis the first nominated. So I'll call for those councillors wishing to support Councillor Ellis for the position for the Eastern Region Group. Councillor Ellis and Councillor Stennett. Those councillors wishing to support Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bennett, Councillor Barker, Councillor Carr, Councillor Davenport and Councillor Cutts, and those councillors wishing to support Councillor Massoud. Councillor Munro, Councillor Massoud, Councillor Liu, Councillor Ellis, you've already voted in the first round. So that being the case, Councillor Ellis has the least number of... I know it's getting very confusing because there have been so many rounds and so many votes. So Councillor Ellis is eliminated, and we move to 2 remaining candidates, that being Councillor Bennett and Councillor Massoud, and I'll call for those councillors wishing to support Councillor Bennett. Councillor Barker, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Carr, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Cutts and Councillor Stennett. That being 6 votes, Councillor Bennett is elected to assist the Mayor as a representative on the Eastern Region Group. Thank you. That is all of the positions, I believe, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Duff. Councillors, I'd like to congratulate all councillors that have been successful in the election for the committees and organisations and community bodies this evening. I'm sure that you all represent the council very well on each of those respective bodies. The recommendation before me is that council appoints councillor representatives to the committees, organisations and community bodies as detailed in Appendix A, and as the elections have fulfilled the positions that were blank, I call upon nominations on a mover.
Happy to move.
Councillor Ellis.
Happy to second.
Councillor Carr to second. Councillor Cutts to second. Sorry, Councillor Cutts. I'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carry unanimously. Councillors, I'll move on to the next item of the agenda, which is item number 10. Reports from delegates, special committee recommendations and assembly of councillor records. Item 10.1, reports by delegates. I will start on my left-hand side. Councillor Carr. Sorry.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I thought you were going to start from the other end. I have nothing to report, thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I've got three quickies here. I'll try and be as quick as I can. The first one, the Eastern Transport Coalition. There were two meetings between now and the previous council meeting, so I'll report briefly on both. The 26th of October, there were presentations by Chris Lowe, who's the director of the Bus Association of Victoria, and also Professor Graham Curry, who many of you will know, who's an international public transport researcher out of Monash. So they spoke all about the challenges of the bus network in the eastern suburbs in particular, and the falling patronage with bus services. And from a viewpoint both locally and internationally, it's the frequency of bus services that drives bus usage. There's many other factors, but the primary factor about bus usage is if you know there's going to be a bus there frequently. The next meeting, 16th of October at Knox, a presentation from the RACV about their on-track survey that's currently running throughout this month. So they have that every 2 years, and it focuses on the train commuters and train stations. So it should be very interesting to see what the public thinks about our train stations and services provided on the train network on the Belgrave-Lilydale line. There's a meeting arranged this Wednesday with Sean Lean and Drew Douglas, who's the Senior Advisor to Minister Jacinta Allen, to update the status of the Eastern Transport Coalition projects, and our Manager, Engineering and Environmental Services will attend that. So it's a very important update. I'd have to say that former Mayor Masood has completed a video for the ETC, and that was just fantastic, and that highlighted the need for the Box Hill interchange upgrade. So thank you, Councillor Masood, for agreeing to do that. The other delegate position was the Metro Local Government Waste Forum that was held on the 9th of November. So that was interesting about landfills, presentation by the EPA Waste Policy Officer. So they're working on a landfill register to be published the end of February next year. And there's a risk self-assessment of closed landfill sites, so that will include the ones here in Whitehorse. And then there'll be a budget assessment for remediation after that. Also, just to confirm that, as far as e-waste is concerned, electronic waste, there'll be a ban on that from the 1st of July 2018, so just over 6 months away. So e-waste is defined as anything with a battery or a plug. So basically anything that's electric is classified as e-waste and will be banned from landfill from the 1st of July. So it will have implications for our transfer station. There'll have to be a significant upgrade to our transfer station to deal with that. And we have an officer to attend a workshop, I think, later on this week to find out a few more details about that. But that's something that's quite significant. So I guess it's with mixed feelings that I make my final report as the delegate to the Whitehorse Business Group. On the 14th of November, we did have a business group meeting, and the board meeting on the 14th of November confirmed that the new website for the Whitehorse Business Group is nearly ready, and we're in discussions for the program for next year. And also, there's concentration on following up from the Business Awards function to improve for next year, because this is the preeminent function that the Whitehorse Business Group runs on a yearly basis. So there was a promotion. The Whitehorse Business Group supports the our Think Local, Buy Local campaign. There was also a networking session that a number of councillors attended at the Clarion last Thursday, a very successful networking session. So I'd like to thank councillors for their support over the last 12 months, and for Councillor Liu as my co-board member on the Whitehorse Business Group, and look forward to further success with Councillor Cutts, now the new delegate to the Whitehorse Business Group. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Barker.
Nothing to report, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one thing to report, and that's just the Whitehorse Business Group board meeting, as well as the networking event that Councillor Bennett had covered quite thoroughly. Look, I just wanted to say that it's been a real pleasure working with Bill on the Whitehorse Business Group board. Certainly, Bill's given a lot of positive input and feedback and value into the group, and yeah, so I'd just like to say thank you, Bill. And that being said, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Cutts, and I look forward to working with you in the year ahead. Thank you.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. On the, I think it's the 16th of last month, there was a Library Corporation board meeting, which was the last one that I attended. I would like to welcome the two new delegates, Councillor Cutts and Councillor Liu, and I hope they enjoy it as much as I have. I've spent a lot of time on the Library Corporation over the years, periods off and periods on. You will love it. You will really enjoy it. And the main item of business that night was to look at the annual report that was being published and to approve that on the board. So I'm looking forward to hearing your report when you have your meeting, which should be in the next week or so. Oh yes, you don't get much notice. My second one is the Eastern Affordable Housing Alliance, which you all know is a little bit of a passion of mine. We had a meeting last Thursday night, and the main item of business was to look at our advocacy statements, both for federal and state election that's coming up, and planning that is now going into us, lobbying during the next 12 months leading up to the state election. And we're hoping to hold another forum. We're hoping to do quite a lot to raise the issue in the eastern suburbs, the shortage of affordability, housing affordability as well as affordable housing, and get some more social housing in our very large buildings that are just dying to have them in there. So I'm looking forward to reporting back on that the next after our next meeting, which will be in February. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The MTF met on the 1st of November, and the key item was a summary of the bus forum that the MTF ran the previous day at the MAV offices, which I attended, and I'll mention that in a moment. Frequency, as Councillor Bennett suggested, was number 1 of 7 items that were discussed. It was a terrific workshop. The MTF is trying to drive the agenda leading into next year's state election, and certainly had the key players from the bus industry, Public Transport Victoria, and many councils, both councillors and officers in attendance. And the MTF meeting, the regular meeting, was basically distilling what came out of the previous day. So certainly a detailed report will become available from the MTF with regards to that.
Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the MAV State Council was held on the 20th of October. There were 57 motions plus 6 late motions, so I don't intend to go through them all because the minutes will eventually be published. Of all the motions put up, they were all passed except one was lost. The lost motion was from Gannawarra Shire, where they were wanting to review current funding ratios to allow increased opportunity for rural and small shire councils to access state government grants, and that was defeated, but it was the only motion that was defeated. Now, we had a major projects councillor reference group meeting on the 13th of November, but since all councillors are in attendance, I'm not sure that we need to report on that. And earlier today, there was an Audit Advisory Committee meeting, and we have new internal auditors, Crowe Horwath, and they presented their final report for the procurement review, which is the below tender threshold part of the procurement review. And the areas of focus and further improvement items were identified and agreed by management. Crowe Horwath also presented audit scopes for the forthcoming reviews on fuel cards and OC health and safety, as well as a quarterly update on reports and publications that may impact on public sector audit activities. The committee received the consolidated results of the self-assessment of the committee's effectiveness for the previous 12 months, 2016-17, against the audit charter performance criteria, and it was the assessments overall were quite high, and I'll leave perhaps some for Councillor Stennett to report on also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Councillor Cutts.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a number of delegate reports. One is the Heritage Advisory Committee that I attended. We actually looked at the Heritage Assistant Fund applications, and they were presented to Councillor Carr and myself. There are a number of applications, more than usual, and that was actually assisted by our change by Council earlier this year when we increased the amount for Heritage Fund from $1,000 to $2,000, and also from 80% of funding up to 100% of the funding. That actually did bring what we hoped it would do, which was very exciting for Councillor Carr and myself. And we came up with the top, what we believed were the top 22 that were worthy of receiving that. So we're very pleased to report that Council, the recommendation has done exactly what we'd hoped it would achieve. The second one was on behalf of the Whitehorse Reconciliation Advisory Committee, which I am leaving and leaving in very good hands of Councillor Stennett, and I'll pass on a lot of information there. But I met with the Wurundjeri tribe at the Abbotsford Convent, which is where their office is, and I met with the acting CEO and the cultural consultation team, Gail Smith from the Terrick family and Julianne Axford from the Nebben family. It was very interesting. I got quite a lot of background on the Wurundjeri tribe, which there are Kulin tribe. There are 5 tribes in Victoria, in the Kulin Nation, of which Wurundjeri is one, and it's made up of 3 families, which are the Wandin, Nebben and Terrick families. So if you hear those names, they are descendants of the Corranderk peoples. So we just talked a range of things there, including the permission to run programs, because the advisory committee is looking at hopefully running some programs in schools and things like this. And there was some mention of the permission being sought from the board of directors at the Wurundjeri office there. So that was important. And also in terms of councils running various activities here to inform the Wurundjeri people, so they want to be informed of what we're doing here. But it was a very useful meeting, and I will, as I said, pass on information to Councillor Stennett. That was followed up by a meeting of the Reconciliation Advisory Committee, which was held on the 2nd of November, and that's where we further investigated how the committee would be moving forward. We've only got, that was our last meeting before the meeting is, the committee is being dissolved after 2 years, and there'll be a new committee set up for next year, which will be going for 4 years to align with the council plan. So we've left with some debate currently around particularly the Australia Day. They're going away to consider what they might put as recommendations to the new chair of the committee, and that will be Councillor Stennett, as I mentioned before. But at this stage, nothing has happened. They're just looking at recommendations, and they've got to come together to have a coordinated approach to this. So that was my last meeting I attended. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got one report from the Audit Advisory Committee meeting, which I attended earlier today with Councillor Masood. First item, the committee noted the 2017-18 work plan, which outlines the reporting timetable and provides a control mechanism to ensure that committee and the management responsibilities are addressed. The committee received management reports on the progress with completing outstanding internal audit report recommendations from the 2016-17 audit plans. I'm happy to say there aren't many of those, and they generally refer to one item which is in the 2017-18 budget, which has been adopted, so those should be resolved this financial year, as well as the September quarterly performance reports which Council had in its papers for decision tonight. The committee heard the twice annual report on risk management activities within Council, including an update on risk management, the action plan and emerging risks, and the committee continues to be pleased with risk management processes in place. The rolling 2-year program of review for selected Council policies has now been completed, and the next Audit Advisory Committee is on the 19th of March.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. I seek a motion to receive and note the delegates' report.
Happy to move.
Councillor Ellis moved.
Happy to second.
Councillor Liu seconded. I put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 10.2, recommendation from the Special Committee of Council meeting of 13th of November 2017. There is one recommendation from Special Committee, being 10.2.1. I seek a mover of the motion that the recommendations of Special Committee be adopted.
Happy to move.
Councillor Masood moved.
Happy to second.
Councillor Munro seconded. I propose to put the motion straight to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Councillor Stennett, are you in favour or against?
So I'm in favour, yeah.
Thank you. Carried unanimously. Next item on the agenda is 10.3, record of assembly of councillors. There is in the agenda Page 58. I do note that there is one amendment to the agenda, and Councillor Cutts had attended the meeting on the 16th of October 2017, and Councillor Cutts, your name will be added to the record of Assembly of Councillors. I seek a motion that with that amendment that the report is received and note the record of Assembly of Councillors.
So moved.
Councillor Bennett moved.
Seconded.
Councillor Masood seconded. Councillors, I propose to put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. The next item on the agenda is item number 11, reports on conferences and seminars attendance. And councillors, I'd like it if you can keep your reports to conferences and seminars that council has sent you on. Thank you. I'll start with Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing to report.
Thank you, Councillor Stennett. Councillor Cutts.
Yes, I have been to a number, Mayor. I attended with Councillor Bennett the e-commerce revolution seminar, all-day seminar at Manningham Sitting Council. It was looking largely at the introduction of Amazon to our retail space, and there were some very interesting speakers there. We covered Bitcoin and blockchain databases and things like that, so they were also very interesting, and I think maybe Councillor Bennett might go into more details because I have a bit to say, so that's what I'll say with that one. On Thursday the 9th of 11th, Councillor Liu and I attended a Managing Communications workshop with Dr. Gary Wallman. He was very entertaining indeed, and I'm not sure whether you've seen him before, but he's a very interesting gentleman, and he talks very well about how we manage ourselves, how we present ourselves. And what I got out of this was that we had to find some personal adjectives which we felt described ourselves, and I will tell you something else, there were 3 of us there. So there was no hiding. There was absolutely no hiding for this whole day. We had to be involved in every single role play and everything like that, and it was really interesting. We also looked at how we walked on the stage, and we owned various parts of the stage in terms of when we were presenting to an audience, and it was a very interesting seminar indeed. And if anyone hasn't been to this, I will recommend you go to this because it was, I think, Councillor, you will agree, it was very, very interesting, and I came away with lots of knowledge from that. And the last one, which I attended today in the city all day, was on chairing meetings. And this was run by Cheryl Bromfield, who was excellent. We had about 7 people there. We had a lot of role plays. We looked at many things that we covered there we had actually covered in our last year since I've been elected, and it was good to know that we're all on there. But one thing that did occur to me was that all the 79 councils in Victoria have got their own protocol, meeting procedures, whereas if you go to South Australia or Tasmania, they've all got the same. So all the different councils who were represented there, we had different ways of doing things. But also, once again, I would definitely recommend this. Cheryl Bromfield, she was an excellent presenter. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cutts. Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the ICTC conference along with Councillor Ellis, and it was a 2-day conference. I've got a lot of bits that I could talk about, so I'll keep it simple. But one of the things that stood out was what they described as the new term is the leisure destination. So we don't talk about shopping centres, that it's actually a focus of this is how you spend your leisure time. You need seamless integration with the suburb. You need to make it beautiful and livable as part of your shopping. There was an outstanding speaker, Jessica Lappin from the US, who was talking about Lower Manhattan and what they'd achieved there. And it included, they attracted tech and media organisations and really invigorated the area. There were a lot of presentations. We had Stuart Mosley from the Victorian Planning Authority and talking about the 20-minute neighbourhood that is the goal, I think, where they believe 70% of Melbourne's growth will be in the inner and middle suburbs, and only 15% of jobs are in the inner city. So we need to get higher order jobs out into the middle and outer regions, and of course we know that Box Hill is a target, so as a metropolitan activity centre, and we're seeing a lot of growth there in our economic and jobs growth, I guess, and I better stop there or I could go on for a long time.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I mentioned before, on the 31st of October, the MTF had a day-long discussion forum on buses and what they could mean for Melbourne moving forward. One of our council officers, transport engineers, was in attendance for both the morning and the afternoon session. The afternoon session was to try and look at the strategies to how to come up with the outcomes that were discussed in the morning. I think there is a lot of opportunity with buses. They're a much cheaper option to roll out a public transport solution than tram and rail, and they offer a lot of versatility. And Professor Curry's name was mentioned before, and he showed some pictures of buses of the future that are very indistinguishable between trams, but the advantage of them is that they don't require the infrastructure that the tram network does, but basically carry the volumes of passengers. So there is some interesting technology that's likely to come in the next few years, and technology in the hands of people to understand their bus routes better. And certainly we as a municipality should have a dialogue with the bus companies to see how we can be well serviced. The report is not out yet, but certainly councillors interested, I can furnish that when it's available.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Ellis.
I too attended the ICTC, and could I request that I lodge my report next month? I'm still going through all my copious amounts of notes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Liu.
Yes, just one to report, Mayor, and it's what Councillor Cutts had previously mentioned. So on the 9th of November, I also attended the MAB Managing Communications workshop. There were only 3 of us, so Dr. Gary certainly was a very interesting presenter, and he was also able to tailor it to some of the specific issues that we may be facing, and I got a lot out of the seminar. It was very practical, and we role played a lot of different scenarios, and certainly I picked up some great tips just in terms of better communication strategies. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Nothing to report, Mayor.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the MAV annual conference was held on the 9th of October that the Mayor and I attended the daytime sessions. So the theme there was innovative futures, responsive leadership and improving community connection. So there were some interesting speakers. The presentations are on the website if you want to have a look at some of those presentations. There was Jenny Brocky, who you might know, who runs a program on SBS, I think it is, that was talking about how local government can deal better with the community, and I found that particularly interesting. These sorts of things are a great opportunity for networking with other councillors from around the state, and I encourage you to take the time to go to a MAV annual conference in the future. But of course the highlight was the evening session where our own Councillor Stennett was awarded the 10-year award. So congratulations, Councillor Stennett, on 10 years of hard labour, of good work. Yeah. Also with Councillor Cutts, I attended the e-commerce revolution at Manningham, and Councillor Cutts has already mentioned some stuff, but I wrote down here about what I thought were really brave new world type of things that were happening as far as technologies with artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, blockchain solutions for business, and cryptocurrency, and we're probably all aware of how Bitcoin has really taken hold, and I can't say I understand the intricacies of Bitcoin, but apparently it's worth more than gold or something now. So some interesting things that they are realities and things that we really have to get across. One of the major themes of that e-commerce revolution was threats to data. And the lady that was making the presentation was quite frightening in making sure that we did things like backing up our data daily, encrypting everything, and one that Councillor Ellis will like in particular when travelling overseas: don't use public Wi-Fi because it's not safe. So I thought that was interesting. The other thing was it had a lot to do with Amazon as well, and Amazon is far and away the major online retailer in the States, with over 53% of total online retail sales. They have 380 million products. And you might be aware that their Dandenong warehouse is, maybe it's already open, but certainly before Christmas that will be open. So they might be starting relatively small, but they will get bigger. And it will have an effect on traditional businesses within our environment. The other one quickly was the Business Safety and Security Forum and Expo that was held actually here, and that was organised by our own officers from the Business and Economic Development and also the Community Development teams. So this expo focused on practical ideas to protect our local businesses and promote community safety. So you'll all know John Sylvester, Sly of the Underworld, who was the keynote speaker, and just excellent in some of the stories he told us about the underworld and underbelly in particular. Also, Detective Sergeant Scott Dwyer from the Eastern Region Crime Squad did talk about the many anti-theft processes that could be used for businesses in our local area. It was also an opportunity to launch the Think Local, Buy Local campaign that's running now. So I'd encourage everyone to think local and buy local. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Nothing to report, Mr Mayor.
Councillors, I have one report. On the 16th and 17th of November, I attended the 2nd Australia Smart Cities and Infrastructure Forum held in the Ridges Hotel in Swanson Street, Carlton. There were a number of speakers that presented over the 2 days, but I wanted to raise one particular point for you to consider. Technology and the use of technology and digital transformation strategies and the like need to respond to solving problems and not be undertaken in their own right. All of the case studies that were presented used digital transformation strategies as well as smart city type concepts to solve particular types of problems. And one that springs to mind is here in the city of Whitehorse with parking and traffic. The Israeli case that came out from Tel Aviv showed that they can use technology to let people know if there's a car accident or some disruption, so then you can change how you drive or how you commute to certain places. And so it's looking at what problems there are, whether it's traffic congestion or parking in that particular instance, or whether it's other types of issues like public transport types issues, knowing if there's a breakdown there. You've got to start with the problem first and then look at the technology around to see what tools are available to solve. And I think that's a very important way of thinking, and that was my key takeaway from that particular conference. Thank you. Councillors, I seek a motion to receive and note the reports on conferences and seminars.
Happy to move.
Councillor Ellis move.
Happy to second.
Councillor Carr seconded. Is there any discussion, councillors? If not, I will propose to put it straight to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Councillors, we move to the next item on the agenda, confidential reports. I seek a motion.
Mayor?
Yes, Councillor Barker.
Mayor, I move that the council, in regard to the confidential item 12.1, that the matter not move into camera and consider the matter in a public meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. I recognise your motion as an alternate, as I was about to seek to go into camera, but I recognise you've moved an alternate. Is there a seconder?
Mayor, I will second just to hear what Councillor Barker has to say.
Thank you, Councillor Liu. Councillor Barker.
Thanks very much, Mayor. I made a commitment when I sought election to council that I wanted this place to be a lot more transparent and more open. And Mayor, in my mind, to move this matter into camera would effectively undermine the object, intention and application of both the Local Government Act and the Freedom of Information Act, which are both acts that have lawful jurisdiction over the conduct of these meetings. Now, Mayor, under the Local Government Act, Section 89, this matter is referred to as a contractual matter, and I note that in that act of the Local Government Act, any meeting of a council or special committee must be open to the public. And there are a number of occasions where a meeting can be closed, and of course one of those is, as listed, a contractual matter, so are industrial matters, a personal matter and the personal hardship of a resident or ratepayer. But Mr Mayor, in my mind, this matter, having read the confidential report, is not a contractual matter. There are no parties to it, there are no clauses, there are no conditions. This is not a contractual matter. So in my mind, this doesn't satisfy the reason to close a meeting, Mr Mayor. Secondly, Mr Mayor, the Freedom of Information Act, Section 3.1, the object of that act is very, very clear, and it works in relation with the Local Government Act, which is, and the object of that act is to extend as far as possible the right of the community to access the information in the possession of the Government of Victoria and other bodies, us being one of those other bodies, Mr Mayor. Moreover, Section 3.1b continues that, and that act that interacts with the Local Government Act creates a general right of access to information, limited only by exceptions and exemptions necessary for the protection of essential public interests. I say that again, for the protection of essential public interests. Now, the public interest test in that act is pretty prescriptive as well, Mr Mayor, because it's specifically laid out. And I take you, Mayor, to Section 36 of that Act. So let's have a look at that public interest test. That this is effectively to have an adverse effect on the economy of a municipal district, which is where might be talking about rates and fees and charges, or the acquisition of land or planning controls. Now, clearly, this matter doesn't pass that public interest test. And in B, the public interest test goes to that in the case of document, its disclosure would be contrary to the public interest by reason that it would disclose instructions issued to or provided for the use of officers of a council in applied negotiation, commercial, labour negotiation and the execution of contracts. Now, quite clearly, the matter that would be moved into camera does not satisfy any of those public interest tests, and it doesn't satisfy any of the tests or the conditions laid out in the Local Government Act, Mayor. Now, I'm happy for this to be postponed, that you might consider it or have a recess so that you can consult officers, but in my mind there's no reason why this needs to be in an open meeting. And I might further add, Mr Mayor, that there is in the FOI Act, there's the method that you could use in a subsequent meeting, which is the deletion of exempt matter. And that's Section 25B, where it's practical to grant access to the document for people so that it's not an exempt document, i.e. it can't be released under that Act. Because to proceed in camera means that the minutes under Section 38A1 means that those minutes can't be released to the public at any time if we proceed in camera. So, Mayor, I'd urge all councillors to say that this should be a matter discussed with the continuation of the public meeting. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Councillor Liu.
Nothing to add to that. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any speakers against the motion?
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I understand Councillor Barker's point about giving the public as broader information as possible and having something in the public domain. But I'd say to Councillor Barker, this is a question of timing. Should this matter be dealt with by Council moving forward in a particular way, the public will be aware of what we are potentially discussing in confidential tonight in due course. Councillor Barker suggests that this is not about a contract at this point in time. Councillors, clearly what's in this report, and should it go to the next stage, at the end of the day, it will involve contracts, tenders, a commercial process involving council. That information is alluded to in the report before councillors, and it's not information that's appropriate in the public domain at this point in time because it will harm council's interest. It is not in our interest to broadcast the facts and figures that are around what is proposed by officers. And councillors, this is a very good news story, and should we get to confidential tonight, I'll be able to talk a bit more about why it is a good news story. But in the fullness of time, this information will go through its process and the outcome will become public information. So let council deal with it in an appropriate matter. It's been deemed that the information is confidential. There is commercial information in there. It will damage council's prospects commercially moving forward if the information is released prematurely, and I'd urge councillors to reject Councillor Barker's motion.
Are there any speakers in favour of the motion? Any other speakers? Councillor Barker, I'll give you the right of reply.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Councillors, the whole basis of democracy is about openness. And openness builds confidence and openness builds trust. There is no need to keep this secret. There is no need to keep it secret. This is a fantasy to say that this document, and it seems ridiculous, and I apologise to everyone in the gallery because we can't actually talk about what the matter's about.
Point of order.
Because you're insisting...
Councillor Barker, I recognise Councillor Stennett. Can you explain your point of order?
Yeah, I just think Councillor Barker should add there's no need in his humble opinion and then go on, rather than there's no need to, because that's just your opinion.
Councillor Stennett, Councillor Barker, please continue.
Thanks, Mayor. There is no contract being discussed in here. There are no parties, there are no clauses, there is no... I mean, this is what you need to have a contract: an offer, an acceptance, a price, any of the sorts of features of a contract that one needs to have a contract is just not mentioned in this, Mr Mayor. Not at all. So it's not a contractual matter and it should proceed in public. And the only way that we're going to build community confidence in this great, even greater community confidence in this great organisation, is to be open about things and providing this sort of stuff so people can see. I think someone mentioned to me the other day about a sausage roll, Mr Mayor. You like to eat it, but you don't necessarily want to see how it's made. And this confidential item is one of those items. It's the making of a sausage roll. The outcome, as Mr Munro says, is a good one. But it needs to be done in the open. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against?
Division.
The motion is lost. A division has been called. All those in favour? Councillor Barker. Against? Councillor Ellis. Councillor Liu. Councillor Bennett. Councillor Carr. Councillor Davenport. Councillor Stennett. Councillor Cutts. Councillor Massoud. Councillor Munro. Declare the motion lost. Councillors, I seek a motion to go into camera to consider item 12.1, a contractual matter.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Munro,
Happy to second.
seconded by Councillor Ellis. Councillors, is there any discussion? I propose to put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Carried. I ask the members of the gallery to please leave. You're welcome to stay outside and return once the meeting returns to an open meeting. But thank you everyone for your attendance.